Welcome to The Path. This podcast is a production of the men's ministry of First Baptist Church in Hendersonville, Tennessee.
This is the Path Podcast. I'm Jeff Tarkington along with fcarney. Today our guest is Brian Manning. I've known Brian for quite a number of years, and that's because our sons are the same age, went to elementary, middle, high school together. I think this is going to be a great episode today. Definitely a lot to talk about, and everything that's going on with Brian and his life, especially over the past few years. So welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks for having me. It's great to meet you, Foster, and like Jeff said, we've known each other for a long time, so honored to be here.
Yeah. So I guess let's get started, kind of like what we do with everybody. We just kind of get a background of you. And I know you're from the Middle Tennessee area. Is this like where you were born and everything?
Very close. So depending on the context, I generally say born and raised. The technicality there is I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, but I didn't spend much time there at all. I was born in Louisville. My family moved back here pretty quickly after I was born. I grew up in Neely's Bend in Madison. Went to a church there in the middle of Madison, City Road Chapel United Methodist Church, where it felt like most of the community of Madison went. Went to Davidson Academy from kindergarten all the way through my senior year of high school and made some great friends there that I'm still friends with today. And then went off to school at UT Knoxville. Spent about 4.5 years at UT Knoxville and immediately came right back here. So not technically born and raised, but about as close to it as you can get.
Yeah, and I guess I've heard about you being at Davidson Academy. Of course, my wife went to Davidson Academy, and she's a little younger than both of us. But then one of her best friends, her husband, was probably there when you were there too. Her name's Megan Locke, now Megan Purdue.
Yep.
And
Ben.
Yeah. So, and I think he's the same age as me. And I think I'm a couple years older than you, maybe.
I think Ben graduated a year ahead of me at Davidson.
And since we talked about high school and everything, I know you're involved in sports.
Very much.
I believe you played football there, right?
I did. I played football from middle school into high school and then wanted to continue playing into college. May have had an opportunity or two to do that, but I injured my shoulder, which is a whole other story, my sophomore year of high school, and didn't realize the severity of it until nearing the end of my senior year, and continued to have some problems, and it has led to multiple surgeries, and now at this point, at 45 years old, multiple shoulder replacements, which is pretty cool. But at as my senior year was ending, the doctor sort of looked at it and didn't think it was probably wise for me to do that. So I had a surgery. And after that surgery, the conversations about the potential to play college football sort of ended there. And I had to come to terms with the fact that that part of my life was over with. So the next best thing is coaching. And I've spent a whole lot of time doing that since.
So I get you're 17, 18 years old when you realize, hey, I'm done playing.
Yep. I'll never forget. I sort of felt we lost in the first round of the playoffs my senior year of high school. And I remember the game ending and sitting in the locker room and thinking, there's a really good chance, because I knew my shoulder was in pretty bad shape, that this is the last time I'll put football pads on again. And that was challenging to come to terms with. And then, like I said, in February of the following year, I had a pretty significant surgery, and that wrapped that up. And so I did have to come to terms with, okay, what does life look like now? Because for the most part, up until that point, like I imagine a lot of teenage boys do, I'd kind of identified myself as an athlete, and that part of me was going to come to an end. So that was a little bit of a challenging point in life.
And especially with football, and that's different than a lot of other sports. Like, you know, if you're playing basketball and that's really what you do a lot, there's always ways you can still go play, which, you know, if you're a football player, most likely when you're done in high school, you're probably not going to play. I know there's adult leagues and everything, but, you know, much more of a risk of getting hurt.
Yep. And the longer you go on, the more chance of an injury there is.
You know, you get out of high school and you're either going to college or you're having, you know, a real life adult job and everything, and you can't really take that chance of being hurt. You know, if you're a baseball player, you have softball and there's different things to kind of stay in it. But football, it's kind of over.
A little bit unique that way.
Yeah. And I guess, so that you said that led you into going down the coaching road. were you coaching while you were in college also, or?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of everything. And while I was in college, I had one of those sliding door moments that's really interesting. I tend to live life without regret, right? And it is one of those moments that you do kind of wonder what if. When I was at UT, I had a relationship with a family who was pretty tied in at Maryville High School. And if you know anything about high school football in Tennessee, Maryville is a very storied program. My sophomore year at UT was George Quarles' first year coaching at Maryville. And they had a relationship that they introduced me to him, and he offered me an opportunity as just a volunteer to come help out on their high school team as just an assistant coach. And I was pretty excited about the opportunity because I was still trying to figure out how to scratch that itch for football and do all those types of things. And so I was really excited about the potential for that. Well, it just so turned out that a statistics class that I had to have was the following fall from 3 to 4:30 in the afternoon, and that put the kibosh on any opportunity that I was going to have to go coach at Maryville High School. And so I had to call Coach Quarles and tell him, hey, Coach, I'm sorry, but I appreciate the opportunity. I'm just not going to be able to take advantage of it. And I'd love to know what life would have looked like for me if that would have worked out. You know, again, it's one of those sliding door moments where it just, you know, the Lord had obviously different plans for me and for my life and the direction that it would go. But I'm really curious to know, had I continued as a part of that program as he was starting to build something that's very significant. He's one of the winningest coaches in Tennessee high school football history.
Probably not just Tennessee either.
Yeah, that's right.
Nationwide.
What would life had looked like? It's a curious moment. And so from there, you know, I've done all sorts of recreational coaching and helped out and tried to be involved. And whether my kids were involved or not, you know, I've enjoyed doing it. I do feel like coaching's a little bit of a calling. I love pouring into kids. I love spending time and being an influence and trying to see something in somebody and trying to draw that out of them that they might not necessarily see or believe about themselves. And I guess maybe early on in my early 20s, I did that for maybe more selfish purposes. It was really about my motivation to win and dominate and compete and do those types of things. But I think maybe with a little time and a little maturity, I started to figure out that it's more than that. Really funny story about that. So a buddy of mine and I were asked to do Upward. It was flag football at the time. It was here at First Baptist. And this was, Luke, my oldest, may have been 2 or 3 years old. He wasn't even playing at that point. But they needed coaches for the Upward Flag Football League. And so they asked a buddy of mine and I to come coach. Well, we did, and we were pretty successful. And so we transitioned into Upward Basketball. Well, if you know anything about Upward Basketball, you've got 8, 9, 10 kids on a team, and you do some sort of an evaluation just to see aptitude. And each player on the team is then numbered 1 through 5. So your starting lineup is 5 kids, and those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you've got whatever 6, 7, 8 after that. And at that point in time, we played 6 periods. So you played 2 halves, 3 periods each, and that was in order to get everybody through. Well, the other coach and I sort of figured a loophole in the system. What we learned was that upon getting 2 fouls in a period, you had to go sit out. And then whoever was on the bench, next on the bench, would then step in. So we'd put our first 5 out for the first period, and we'd get a sizable lead. And then when the next group would come in, we would just encourage them to play aggressively. Well, conveniently, within about a minute or 2 of that next period, that entire group had 2 fouls, and they had to go sit down. And our first group got to come in against the other team's second group and extend the lead. And I think people caught on by the end.
So you're working the system of Upward Basketball.
Working the system of Upward Basketball, and we very quickly got asked at the end of that season to no longer be a part of the Upward Basketball program.
So my youngest are playing Upward Beach Cumberland Church, because we don't have it here anymore. And it's all done through an app now, so you don't even... all substitutions or everything are automatic through the app, and I don't think they do the foul rule anymore.
That may be the Brian Manning rule. That may be an exception that they made because of some jerks back about 20 or so years ago that were working the system a little bit.
You talk about coaching, and Foster's been in that life now for a couple of years because his youngest is Bo, and he's what, 10?
He's 11.
He's 11, and he's been playing flag, and they play in the FCA league in Gallatin. So,
Yeah, I think what you said, coaching is a calling, and I don't know crap about football, and I don't even care. But I love my son, and he loves football. So for 6 seasons, I've been coaching these kids. But what I learned is, aside from the football, every week I have an opportunity to pour Jesus into the kids, and that's what I love. And it's fun to win. It's fun to win some, and we don't win much. But so I am definitely called to coach the kids, but I don't know if it is in football. So.
Yeah, well,
as Bo gets older, he'll be the team chaplain because he doesn't care about winning.
Yeah.
So he can go pray for
and I tell you, the bad thing is, I wish he'd let somebody else coach him, because he gets. I mean, he's an MVP. He gets All-Star every year. I mean, he's got all kinds of talent. I just can't teach him how to play ball. I mean, yeah, whatever. But
I want to go back. You said you went to Davidson Academy.
I did.
What kind of role did going to a private Christian school play in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a conversation I have with a lot of people. And, I went there from K through 12. So I was there the entire time. I didn't know anything any different. And I find I've met a lot of people. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people through life and career and those types of things. And so when we have the conversation between public and private and what does that look like, and then transitioning from high school into college, and people ask my opinion for whatever reason, what I thought was great about attending a private school like Davidson was it gave me the opportunity to sort of build a foundation for who I was as a person, to give me some beliefs that I could really stand on as I would then step out into the world, because there's a fairly significant difference from graduating with a class of 82 people at Davidson Academy and immediately transitioning into UT Knoxville. But I tell people all the time that I'm really thankful that I had that foundation, because of what it built in me and prepared me to then go out really into the world. And I don't know how much different life would have looked like for me had I not had that background, but I do know that what it did provide for me, outside of some lifelong friendships that I still have to this day, is a foundation for how to go out into the world and to live what we believe and we're taught as we're coming up.
That's awesome. So other than football, did you play other sports, or was there other things you were involved in?
It's funny.
While you were in school?
So I was having this conversation with a friend whose daughter is a senior, and she's kind of getting to the point, like we all do, where you start looking forward. It's like, oh man, I got one semester of school left, and she's played some fall sports but hasn't done anything in the spring, and so she's thinking about doing something else. I said, well, we actually did that. So I did not play baseball growing up, and we got to be seniors, and we all kind of looked around. We're decent athletes. And I think there was one person on the tennis team. And so there were about 5 of us who were football players who decided we were going to play tennis our senior year. And none of us had any experience playing tennis at all, but pretty decent athletes. And so I'd actually just had the shoulder surgery that I was talking about earlier. And so I was playing in a immobilizer sling. So my left arm was attached to my body, and I was learning to play with one hand until I was cleared to actually play. But what we would do, most of the other schools we played only had one good tennis player. And so we would kind of do rock, paper, scissors to see which of the 5 or 6 of us would go play their best player. And then the rest of us would kind of dominate whoever else we had to play. That group of kids who had never played tennis before made it to the state tournament in tennis.
Wow.
Mostly because of a little bit of athletic ability and not much of competition. We knew we were going to take it on the chin in one of those matches, but we felt pretty good about our opportunities on the rest of them. And so I'm still not a very good tennis player, but I'm athletic enough to go do it.
So you're going to Davidson Academy. You said you grew up and going to the Methodist Church in Madison. So I'm guessing you grew up in a Christian home. And did you go to Davidson Academy because they wanted you in a Christian school, or was that because you didn't want to go to Metro Public School, or a combination of the two?
I think it's probably a combination of the two. My grandfather was on the board at Davidson Academy, and so I'm sure that probably influenced it a little bit. So. But it was also a matter of living in Madison and not wanting to send me to public schools in the Metro Nashville public school system. But I was raised in a Christian. I mean, I was in church just about every time the doors were open growing up. Like I said, I lived down in Neely's Bend. We went to City Road Chapel United Methodist Church, was on the corner of Neely's Bend Road and Gallatin Road, right in the heart of Madison. And Madison then looked a lot different than Madison does today. But I think it took us 5 or 10 minutes to get to church. And so Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Easter programs, Christmas programs, choir, you name it. I was there and a part of it. Very involved in the youth group, did all kinds of mission trips and all sorts of. That was a significant part of my upbringing. Was very involved in church, and that's due in large part to my parents making sure that we were there. They didn't just, tell us what we needed to do. They modeled it. They were both very involved in church. Both had significant leadership roles, as long as I can remember in the church, as well as my grandparents, and it's just part of the family culture that we thought was important, to not just, say those things, but to actually go out and live and do it and live out what your testimony actually was.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I've got one younger sister who's 3 years younger than I am.
So, being where you're at now in life and being able to reflect back on how you grew up and everything, how important of a role was it that your parents instilled in you the importance of instilling the Christian values and being in church? Well, how do you see that now?
I think it's significant. I think, I think for a lot of us, what we try and do is we look at the things that our parents taught or the things that they modeled. And for most of my life, I say it a lot, I don't go through many days where I don't think about how would my dad handle this situation. Whether that's a big important decision maker or just responding to somebody, I think about how would my dad handle that. And I'm thankful that I had a Christ-following father example who I can look to and very quickly, easily model after that. But I also think there's things that you look at the way you're raised and you think, maybe I'd do that a little bit different. Maybe I'd go a different direction and think about it differently. This may be tangential. Aaron, you may end up wanting to cut this part of it, but I think there was a generation where it was all about be at church, right? You go to church, and I think that was a part of the culture that I grew up in. If the doors were open, I was there. I think my experience growing up that way really emphasized to me, maybe as a more mature believer and as an adult, the criticality of discipleship. Because what I grew up in, whether that was in church or whether that was at the Christian school that I attended, it was a lot about evangelism. It was a lot about tell people about Jesus. It was a lot about salvation. It was a lot about doing those things. I joke, people ask me about my salvation story, and I tell people all the time, well, growing up in a church and attending a Christian school, I rededicated my life. It felt like almost every year, every other year, that was
every time you go to camp, right?
Yeah, that's right. Or you have a speaker that comes through and you just really feel it. And so, that was sort of the life that I live. But it was the maturity process of going from accepting Jesus as my Lord and Savior to then, well, what does that mean for how I live my life? And learning to feed myself and grow myself and my own relationship was something that I think was missed out on. And I think that's more of a generational thing. That's not really passing blame. That's just sort of what it is. And that's why I've, as an adult and maybe as a little more mature Christian today, it's so important from my perspective to focus on discipleship and finding people who you can pour into, but also who can do the same for you. Because I think that's really what we're called to as Christ followers is not only to share Jesus' message of salvation, but then to also teach people to grow in that relationship with them.
Yeah. Oh, it's good. You said something a minute ago. It reminded me of the scripture, Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he grows old, he will not depart from that. And Jeff asked you a question, how did that affect you growing up in the church? And I think it's critical too, that we bring our children to church for sure. But at some point, you're right. They do have to learn how to feed themselves. You can't be on the. I shouldn't say boob, but I'm gonna say boob. You can't be on the boob your whole life. You got to get out and eat some meat. So Aaron will probably definitely cut that. But you know, not a chance. Yeah, and it's sometimes frustrating seeing grown men that are still just wanting the milk, you know, and not willing to carry themselves in a way to just go after the meat of the Lord, and really diving into His Word and being transformed and discipled, being willing to be discipled, but being willing to disciple other men. It's critical for growth, for sure.
Yeah, you talk about being in the generation of, every time the doors are open, we're going to be at the church. And in one of our recent guests, we talked about that, and we're in a way, and you're coming and you're checking all the boxes, but you never made that decision to follow Jesus. So they're saying that, when did you become a Christian? When did you make that decision?
Yeah, so the way that I sort of share my faith journey is that, you know, I do remember a time as a young kid that I did accept Christ. Growing up in the Methodist Church, I was baptized as an infant. And so that really was a point of contention in my family as I got older, and I started to sort of explore, what do I really believe about that? You know, the Methodist Church is there's a methodology to it, right? So there is tradition, and that's a very important part of the Methodist denomination. And so as I grew up and matured, I had to think about, well, what do I really believe about that? And so the way I share my story is, you know, joking earlier, but not really joking. We did Spiritual Emphasis Week every year at Davidson Academy. And you'd have just a series of teachers that would come through, and, you know, everybody get caught up in it, and they do an altar call. And so, you know, you either give your life to Christ, you rededicate. And so, like, I did that, I think, just about every year from whatever that was, like 85 to 98 probably. But my relationship with Jesus really became real when I was, I guess, wrapping up school. I've always lived a life. It feels like I'm a little older than maybe what my age. I've always kind of been an old soul. And as I was in school and kind of wrapping up college, I had this desire to I was ready to grow up. I was ready to go make something of myself. I was ready to go start my career, start a family, ready to go do it. And I didn't include Jesus in that sort of approach. And so what that led to is I ended up meeting a girl. We dated for about 4 or 5 months. And the next thing you know, she's pregnant. And I'll never forget the night that she looked at that pregnancy test. We looked at it together, and it was like, wow. And I hit my knees. And I remember saying directly in that moment, I have tried to do this my way, and it's not working. I was 22 years old. I was making about $300 a week. I was essentially living in my parents' basement. And now I'm about to go get married, have a child, and start life. And it's kind of like God said, okay, you want it your way? Have at it, big boy. Good luck. You know, here it is. But I do specifically remember that night hitting my knees and saying, I've messed up. You know, like, I've tried to do this my way, and it is not working. I need you. I need you. And so I won't ever forget that moment. And it really was a turning point in my life where I think I had to come to the realization of, it's not this lifestyle of I get to go choose what I want to do and ask God to bless it. It's really seeking Him and seeking what His will is for my life, and how does He want me to live my life, and following after Him. That was really the way that I needed to live.
That's a lot. Wow.
It is.
Wow. So, you know, you go, you're trying to do things on your own, you know, and then, you know, I know you go to Long Hollow now. Mm-hmm. What was that like, going from a Methodist church to you go to a Baptist church?
Yeah,
was that a big decision? Or?
It was a significant decision. So the journey there, y'all may hit an all-time record for the length of this podcast, because there's a lot to cover here. I grew up Methodist, but my brother-in-law at the time is still an ordained minister, and felt the call from the Lord to plant a church. And so we planted a church here in Hendersonville. And our group started it together. And that was one of the most rewarding and most challenging times in my life, but we were a Southern Baptist church. And so part of that process was, and he was great with the entire process. It wasn't a situation where he said, Brian, you've got to get baptized. Because to be honest, to that point, I sort of resisted. I kind of dug in my heels and I was pretty stubborn about it. And I was like, this is what I grew up doing. This is what my family believes. And I sort of challenged it and said, I just don't believe it's a heaven-hell issue. And I still don't believe it's a heaven and hell issue. But
that's baptism is not a heaven or hell.
Correct.
Issue. Right.
Yeah.
Salvation is not baptism.
Right.
Amen.
What I finally came to grips with is, and it was what I talked about earlier with discipleship, I didn't want to find myself in a situation where I'm discipling somebody and I'm trying to help them understand, okay, as a Christ follower, this is what this looks like. You believe that Jesus was sent by God here on earth to live and die and be raised for your sins, right? And you've got to accept that in order to go spend eternity with God in heaven. That is a qualification. What Scripture says is the next step is that you choose to be baptized. What I didn't want to have happen, and what I had to rationalize in my head, what I had to come to terms with is, based on my story, if I'm sharing that story with Jeff and telling him, okay, this is what Scripture says, but then Jeff were to ask me, okay, Brian, when did you get baptized? And at that point in my life, I had to say, well, actually, my parents made the choice for me to be baptized when I was an infant. Well, is that helpful or is that hurtful to that conversation with a brand new believer?
It's confusing.
It's
to the new
very
believer.
confusing to a new believer. When I show you in Scripture, this is time and time again, this is what Scripture said. But as somebody who's trying to help you understand Scripture, that's not exactly what I've done. And so I had to come to terms with that. And what I finally, I listened to a message by Andy Stanley. And again, this is a message that he preached, I don't know, probably more than 20 years ago. But it was on baptism. And where I landed on it was that it's not about me. It's about people who I want to disciple down the road, because baptism is not salvation. I knew and understood that I was going to spend my eternity with God through Jesus in heaven. I knew that was going to happen. But I had to get my baptism on the right side of my salvation in order to be able to go out and have those conversations and not be something that somebody else is going to get tripped up over somewhere down the road. And so I was actually baptized at the YMCA right over here, which is where our church was meeting at the time. So we were meeting in a little community space there. And one Sunday, I decided to choose to get baptized. Side story on that, I shared with my parents that I had made the decision that I was going to get baptized. And that didn't go over real well because of our Methodist upbringing and what they believe is the proper choice. And that was a really hard, tearful, challenging conversation. And when I left their house that afternoon, I think my dad was pretty frustrated. My mom was in tears. And I know I was in tears. And I drove home kind of brokenhearted because I felt like I was doing something that I believed I had been asked by the Lord to do. And I was hopeful that my parents as Christians would see that and be proud of me for following through in something that I believe the Lord was asking me to do. I was
Being
not
obedient.
Correct. I was not pursuing some outside random religion. I wasn't doing something super radical. I was doing what I felt the Lord was asking me to do. Not telling them that they were wrong, not telling them that that's what they needed to do. I said this was what I needed to do. So it was very hurtful. I was sharing that the next day with my brother-in-law, who we started the church together. And he said something, the whole thing was so cool to experience. He said, Brian, your parents have the Holy Spirit alive and well in them. The Holy Spirit will convict them, and this will all work itself out. So I was talking to him on my BlackBerry phone. That sort of dates the conversation a little bit. When I hung up, I noticed the little red light on the top of the BlackBerry phone was flashing, which meant I had an email that was unread in my email. So I opened it up, and it was an email from my dad. my dad emailed me and said, I'm so sorry. The way we responded yesterday is not the way that we should have responded. We are so proud of you. We are thankful that you shared that with us, and we will be there in support of you when you decide to get baptized. And so you talk about the Holy Spirit at work, and you talk about a really cool moment. That was a really cool moment. And so it was within a couple of weeks that I decided to get baptized.
That's amazing. Is your brother-in-law still a minister?
He is. So he's down outside of Atlanta. He is a missions pastor for a church in Cumming, Georgia.
I think what you just told us is so important for, you have guys that are Christian, or men, women, Christians, and they maybe come from a different denomination or something, and they're saved. They are a Christian, but then they struggle with the baptism and why that is important. It is important. That is your public profession of faith, and, it's being obedient to what is asked of us.
Jesus did it.
Yep.
Right.
That's exactly right. If it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for Brian Manning.
And I totally get the struggle with that.
Yep.
But man, I think that's important for people to hear. You do that, you get baptized. You just talked about, girlfriend at the time becomes pregnant. Y'all end up getting married. Mm-hmm. How long were y'all? And I know you were married before, so how long were y'all married?
So so we were married. We got married in 2003. So we were married in February of 2003. Luke was born in September. And then Lucy, our daughter, was born about 3 years after that, in November of 2006. And, we lived what I believed to be a really great life. Unfortunately, our relationship ended really suddenly and disappointingly. And it was a really challenging time in my life. So I guess that was in 2013, 2014. We had a conversation, and she basically said she didn't want to be married anymore. And that came completely out of left field to me because, like I said, at the time we had two wonderful, beautiful, healthy, great children. We were very involved actually here at First Baptist Hendersonville. I was leading classes here. We were very involved. It felt like things were really good, and unfortunately, they just weren't. And so it took a very, very, very long time for that to play out because the choice that I made in that moment was, and I shared this with her in multiple conversations, that I believed that we were married until death we parted, and that falling out of love or making a choice or decision really weren't grounds for divorce. And so we made a couple of steps towards mediation or going to meet with attorneys, and I finally just had to draw a line because what I realized, what I came to terms with was at the end of all of this, whatever direction that was going to go that I was unsure of at the time, I knew I was really accountable to three people. One, obviously, was to God and how I walked all of that out. And so I wanted to walk through that entire situation in a way where I could go stand before God one day and not necessarily be proud of the situation, but be accountable to Him for how I navigated and walked through that entire experience. And then I also had to look my two kids in the eyes on the back end of it and let them know that I didn't desire for our relationship to end. That wasn't my choice. It's not something I was going to participate in. There were these mediators that wanted to, friendly undo your marriage and all of that. And I just said, I'm not going to participate in that. I'm just not going to. And so it took a really long time for that to play out. And it was really hard because for the majority of that time frame, I tried to shelter our family from the outside, from people knowing what was going on, because I still had hope that things would shift and turn and maybe things would work out. But I was sitting on Conference Drive one day, and I very plainly felt the Lord reach out to me and say, Brian, if I don't save your marriage, are you still with me? Are we still good? And I was seeing a counselor pretty regularly at that time. And what I had to come to terms with was that there was nothing that I was going to do or not going to do or say or not going to say that was going to change anything about that situation. That the only person that was going to do anything about that was the Holy Spirit piercing her heart and changing the entire direction about it. And I was working pretty hard to try and control the situation because it's just kind of how I'm wired. But it was almost like God just saying, hey, guys, hey, buddy, you need to turn this loose. You need to let go, and you need to trust me. But what I want to know is, if I don't change this, are you still with me? And I said, absolutely. I trust you implicitly, even if it means the end of my marriage. And that's ultimately where it led. So it took a very long time for that to play out. It was very painful in a lot of different ways, but ultimately we did. We ended up getting divorced, and we have 2 children through that marriage, which I'm very thankful for. I said earlier, I don't live life with a lot of regret. I wouldn't change anything about that because I learned a lot through that. And I'm thankful that God has me where I am now, but it was a really challenging time in life, for sure.
Being somebody that went through a divorce, it is so hard.
I tell people all the time, I believe that divorce is Satan being the best at being the worst. It is excruciating. It is hurtful. It is painful. It is so hard on so many different layers in so many different ways.
Yeah, I remember this losing so much weight because I had no appetite. You're in a state of depression, really, because it's like dealing with a death.
Yep.
And it is.
Except you sit there and look at that person all the time.
Right. It's the death of a marriage, and it's so hard. And I don't wish that on anybody. There's way too many divorces, and it is so hard to go through.
Yep.
What was the effect you saw on Lucy and Luke?
So it's really interesting. I've said now, I guess 3 times in our time together that I don't live with a lot of regret. That is one thing that I do sort of look back on, and trying to shield and protect them. I do wonder the effects of that. And, thankfully they've also sought some counseling and done their own work, and I'm thankful that they've sort of walked through that. But I tried to sort of shelter them from the effects of it, and tried to encourage relationship with their mother, and tried to make sure that happened at whatever cost that meant, whether that was financial or emotional or whatever that meant for me. It didn't matter. I wanted to make sure that happened. And so that's probably a better question for the 2 of them than it is for me. I just know one of the toughest things for me to come to grips with when I realized that's the direction things were going was that I never, ever expected that there would be times where I wouldn't get to tell my children good night, And what I realized was that it looked like there was going to be about half the year where that wasn't going to happen.
That's hard.
And that was one of the toughest things for me to come to grips with. Now, the Lord, in all of his goodness, Luke and Lucy spent way more time after that than I ever expected, and what the letter of the law said about things. Because again, he's very good to us, and he just asks us to trust him and not try to control and work everything out on our own. But that was a really, really tough thing to come to grips with.
I got a quick question. It came to my mind, you going through a divorce, and I know Jeff has done that as well. But in your marriage, you said that you and your wife were really involved in church. You served together here in this church, as a matter of fact. Did you ever, as a husband and wife, did y'all ever take time and pray together?
So it's funny you ask that, Foster. If you go look, I'm not sure what the publisher's name is. We actually have a published book that is a 40-day marriage devotional. It was my brother-in-law and I and our wives at the time that says, let's stay married. And so in our church that we planted, we set out and said, hey, we're going to take 40 days, and that's what we're going to focus on. It goes back to discipleship. I can't do it for somebody else. And that's something that's really tough, especially for us type A personalities where you kind of like to go and do and lots of those things. We can't have someone else's relationship with the Lord for them. A counselor put it really well to me this way. She said, Brian, think about playing tennis. You're going to eventually wear yourself out if you serve the ball and you run around the other side and you grab the racket for the other person and you return the ball, and then you drop that racket and you run around to the other side and you hit it back, and then you go grab the, and she said, you can only do that for so long and it just doesn't work. And that helped me put things in perspective, because we did those things. But I think it was heavier weighted for one side than maybe the other.
I remember I've been married 21 years, and 21, I think. And there was just a time where I felt a little bit like we were kind of losing some connection, and I think we were at a marriage conference here, but wherever that conference was, they challenged us, like, grab your wife by the hands and pray with them. And I thought, there ain't no way I'm doing that. But we did do it. And it really set us on a course of, I don't know, kind of letting the walls down, the guard down a little bit. And I feel like it really put our marriage on a new trajectory. It didn't, I mean, we're great now. She's an incredible woman, and I suck, and so it works good together. But so I thought, had I not stopped and prayed with my wife, like with her, hand in hand, looking at each other, how would things be different? And it wasn't about that. It was just about that surrender, that kind of that humility with each. So I was just curious.
So you get divorced. You have, and I'm guessing Luke and Lucy, they're probably elementary school age at this point.
Yeah, so I guess at that point in time, they would have been roughly 10 and 7, 11 and 8. So right around the end of elementary, first part of middle school.
So you're doing that. All of a sudden, you're a single dad, and eventually you meet Cassidy. What kind of time frame was that? How long was there?
It was wild. So that was 2015. So social media is very much a thing, but we had mutual connections. Cassidy worked with my younger sister, and going back to sort of how I navigated my whole journey through divorce and being a single dad and all of that, I did a lot of journaling that I eventually turned into a blog. Because I felt like, well, if I've got to endure this, I hope it can help somebody else. You know, there's going to be somebody else who's probably going to follow a similar journey. And if I can put this out there, awesome. Like, let God take this and use it to help somebody else along the way. And so my sister and another mutual friend that they had sort of started to suggest to Cassidy, like, hey, why don't you check this out? See if maybe, and eventually my sister said the same thing to me about Cassidy. And the first maybe time or two that they presented us to each other, neither one of us really had any interest whatsoever. Because to your point, Jeff, I got to that point, I was 34, 35 years old. I'm a single dad. I'm just, like, what do you even do? Like, I can't even wrap my brain around. Like, I'm trying to get my kids all the different places and pack the lunches and get them to school and do the stuff and whatever. Like, I don't even know what that looks like. And so eventually, I guess both of us surrendered to the fact of, like, okay, they're pretty persistent. They must think that at least we could be friends. So we set up a time to have coffee, and it was as blind of a date as you could go on in 2015. I think both of us had social media profiles, but they weren't super accessible or public, so you couldn't really see a whole lot. You basically see a picture of the person. That was about it. And so we met for coffee, and we essentially covered all the things that we knew about each other that I guess you just felt like you had to do on a first date. And I wasn't really sure where it was going to go from there, but I didn't scare her off too much because we decided to meet for dinner 2 or 3 weeks later, and we probably spent 4 hours that night in dinner just talking about everything, and realized hey, maybe my sister and her friend, maybe they do know what they're talking about. Maybe there is something more to this than just being friends. And so the further that went along, Cassidy has 2 children, London and Finn, and I had Luke and Lucy. London and Finn were much younger at the time. I guess they were roughly 5 and 3 at that point in time. But we started to have that conversation of like, okay, we've got to be really delicate because there's 4 little people who are involved here. And neither one of us were super interested in having the opposite sex adult coming in and out of, people's lives, and you get to meet somebody and then it doesn't work. And so you meet somebody else and then you meet somebody that's not what we wanted our children to experience. And so we had to be really thoughtful about, okay, what does that look like? And so we were really intentional about, how we spent our time and where we were and what we did. Eventually we landed on trying to have sort of a group outing around Halloween. And we had several people over to my house for Halloween, but Cassidy and the kids came up at that point. And so that was my kids' first interaction with Cassidy and her kids. And it was very nonchalant. There wasn't a whole lot going on. We all went trick-or-treating together. It was just an opportunity for like everybody to be together. But then as things progressed, it was like, okay, what does this look like to blend a family? Cassidy's wired very similar to, I tell her all the time, she is the most uniquely wonderful person that I have ever met. There's nobody like her. She is incredible. And I thank God, I tell her she's my miracle. Like at 35 years old, I would have never dreamed in a million years that I would get to meet that person that I get to spend the rest of my life with. God obviously knows what he's doing. And so for the next really almost 2 years, we walk that relationship out of being very intentional. We did a lot of counseling. I ended up starting to go with her to meet with her counselor just to talk through all the life that we had to kind of put together and work through and come to terms with, while also taking care of those 4 little people that God chose for us to be the parents of. And what does that look like and how does it happen? At the time, Cassie was living south of town. She was living in Thompson Station. I was living up here in Hendersonville. And so it was like, what does that look like? And how do we bring those families together? And so we eventually got married in May of 2017. And you talked about us at Long Hollow. That was one of the things that was a challenge for us because Cassidy did choose to move from Thompson Station to Hendersonville. And so for a lot of that, it felt like she was moving into my life. For the most part, she was. We talked about a lot of ideas, but she, when I went through my divorce, we had just purchased a house, literally within weeks of my ex-wife telling me she didn't want to be married anymore. We had just bought a house, and we didn't have furniture in parts of the house. And so what we landed on was like, it was a nice house. It was a good place to be. And to be honest, like it was worked out pretty well because there weren't really any previous family memories there. It was sort of a clean slate. And so she moved in there, and we had to choose a church that felt like our church, not another part of life where she just kind of came in and she met all the people that I had years of relationship with and all of it. We had to do something. And so we spent the better part of a year going from church to church to church to church to church to find something where it felt like it was our decision, not just another piece of my life where she was just simply fitting into. And that's how we landed at Long Hollow. But since we've gone through a lot in blending our family together. London and Finn have different biological dads. Finn's never met his biological father. And so in August of that year, we got married in May. In August, I legally adopted Finn. And so he is ours together. And we thought that he was going to be our baby together.
Then that changed a few years later.
That did change
a
few years later.
We'll get into that in a minute. That's just amazing. And, when one of our recent episodes, we were talking to a guy, and him and his wife had to change churches. And, just changing churches on a whim is one thing, but when you have a significant and I think that's a very important thing. Like, you and your ex-wife were going to church here, and you don't, that's odd. Mm-hmm. It can be very difficult. So, I don't find that I found that a good reason to. You got to make your own home with your spouse and everything. Just like when we had Davy Glover's episode will come out before yours, but they had the death of a child and didn't want. I don't know if you know Davy or not. He has Tristan, who's the same age as Luke and Joshua, and they had a daughter that died when she was about 3 years old, and they were going to Parkway Baptist in Goodlettsville, and the funeral was there, and they couldn't go back because every time they went back in the church, that's what they saw, which, total understandable reason why you would change churches. So one of the things I want to talk about with you, I mean, obviously it seems like you've really made an important thing, how the impact you're having on your kid's life. And when our sons were seniors, I was at a thing, I think it was actually the Football for the Cure thing that Jameson Warden would do. And the guy that was the writer for the paper was there. Him and I, we knew each other because I was coaching basketball at Gallatin High School at the time, so we would talk. And we ended up talking about Luke. And he talked about something Coach Beasley had told him, and that how much of a leader Luke was on the team. And not just that, but he led like 4 or 5 other guys on the football team to following Christ. And I just see that, and that goes into the way you're raising them and the way that he was leading his, fellow teammates. And as a high school player, that's pretty bold.
Absolutely.
To be that bold about and he always was. It seems like even in middle school and stuff, he was always like that, the guy that was going to be bold and talk about his faith. And, of course, I didn't hear it because I wasn't in high school, but to be able to lead 4 to 5 guys, and it may be more than that, I don't know, on your football team to following Christ, that's, as a dad, I can't imagine how proud you are to be able to see that and just hear those kind of things about him.
When he finished his high school career, he accomplished some pretty cool things. Our boys had the opportunity to be a part of a really great
football a great team. Watching them from middle school all the way through high school.
It was. I tell Finn, who's 13 now, who's wrapping up middle school right now, that was a generational bunch of boys. You just don't get a group of guys that come through with the talent that group did, but also that the friendships and the relationships and all of it. And so they were able to do a lot of cool stuff and accomplish things both as a team, and Luke able to accomplish things individually. But I told him that there was nothing that I was more proud of than the way he led his team spiritually. It wasn't just in helping lead, 4 or 5 of his teammates to Christ, but he started a Bible study with that group that didn't exist previously. He would reach out to 1 or 2 of the key players from every other team and get them to come together and pray at midfield after the game. Robbie, the pastor at Long Hollow, sent me a really cool picture from the beach game, and the Beach-Hendersonville rivalry is what it is, and there had been all kinds of it actually had made the news, some of the crazy stuff that had happened that week. But Robbie sent me a really cool picture where Luke's got his arms on a couple of the beach kids, and they're praying after the game. And I shared with him when high school was done, it was like, as proud as I am of all the awesome stuff and as hard as you have worked that you've accomplished on the football field, this is stuff that lasts into eternity. And that's what I'm really proud of. And he has continued to do those things as he's gone on and played in college. He has definitely made me a proud dad.
That's great. And as we're progressing, Luke, they graduate high school and everything, and I guess Lucy's 2 years younger?
She's 3 years behind him.
Okay, so Emily is 2 years younger than Joshua. So it's funny, our kids are right about the same age. So you go through that, and now Lucy, she's at Merrill Hyde Magnet School.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, you get the big news.
Yeah.
I guess she'd been sick, and
yeah. So it was a crazy journey with Lucy. So I guess the January or February, I think it was the February. No, it was her accident was in December, actually. She was in a pretty bad car accident right out here on Gallatin Road where she was rear-ended. A guy wasn't paying attention and hit her going about 55 miles an hour. And, it's one of those moments as a parent you always freak out by because it was actually her phone called me without her doing it. I was listed as the emergency contact, and I'm sitting in my office at work. It was about 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and it rings, but it's not Lucy talking to me. It's a lady who was an off-duty nurse who was standing there with her, who was talking to me and saying that Lucy had been in a car accident. Lucy was conscious, but she'd been in pretty bad car accidents. I mean, I'm jumping up and I'm driving to get there, and she ended up being okay. I think she probably had a concussion and some scratches, but outside of that, she was okay. About 6 weeks or so later, she started having some pain. So we ended up taking her to the emergency room, and they couldn't really find any issue, but it was pain in her side, and they couldn't really pinpoint what the issue was. But from that point on, she was progressively tired and lethargic, and she was a pretty busy, active girl. She played soccer. She was a cheerleader. She did a lot, and just really didn't feel like doing much of anything outside of just laying around. And we took her to her pediatrician. We took her to lots of doctors trying to understand what was going on. They sort of diagnosed her that she might have been anemic and put her on some iron supplements, and that didn't seem to help the issue. And finally, her pediatrician said, let's go to Vanderbilt and just have the full panel of work done and understand what in the world is going on. Well, it didn't take long to get to the root of the problem, which was Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it took a couple of procedures and some working to understand that in September of that year, she was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. Well, concurrently, while this is happening, Henry, who is now our 5th child, enters the world. And so on September 23rd, Henry was born around 7 o'clock that night. At 5 o'clock the next morning, Lucy was having her second surgery at Vanderbilt Hospital to do a procedure where they would go in and confirm, sort of where the cancer was, and that's actually what we were dealing with. And so I left Centennial Hospital, where Henry was born, around 5, and made my way over to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital around 5:30 in the morning. And so I've got 2 children in 2 separate hospitals, essentially at the same time, and not a whole lot of sleep. And so it was just kind of one of those moments where you're like looking around wondering what in the world is going on. And so that started a very long journey for Lucy that she's still on right now, where she went through about 6 months of chemo. She ended up losing her hair. She ended up missing most of her senior year of high school. She started going when she was in some off weeks. She was getting chemo every other week. And so she would go to school in the spring during her off week just to try to get back to some sort of normalcy and enjoy part of her senior year. But then in the summer, over the summer this past year, they discovered a couple of more spots that didn't respond to the original chemo. And so the next step in that journey was to do a stem cell transplant. And I had no idea about what any of that meant or what it looked like, but what it essentially meant was about a month-long hospital stay for her, where for the first week, she would receive pretty intense chemo about every 12 hours. And then at the end of those treatments, she would have her stem cells reinfused back into her body. And then it just would let the body respond to that however it could. And so through the course of that, we did some fertility treatment, because it was expected that once she went through this portion of the stem cell transplant and all the chemo, it would be very unlikely she'd be able to conceive children on her own. So we felt like the best approach would be to go ahead and preserve some of her eggs, so that if that's what she wanted to do down the road, we'd rather have them and not need them than need them and not have them. And she donated her own stem cells, and so they withdrew those and they kept those, and then when it was time, they put those back into her body. But now she's doing radiation, and she's trending towards being able to go to school in January, which we're very thankful for. But her attitude, her approach, the way she navigated that entire journey could not have made me more proud as a dad, because she had her moments of disappointment and sadness and loss and grief, because there was a lot that she did lose over a year and a half. She missed out on most of her senior year of high school. She missed out on her first semester of college. All of her friends were going off to school and joining sororities and doing the fun stuff, and she was prepping to go stay for a month in a hospital room. But she never lost faith. In fact, I think she made a significant difference and a significant impact on a lot of people in how she sort of walked out this entire journey. And consistently through her social media posts and videos that she did, and just the message that she would share, would continue to talk about God's goodness. And again, from a father's perspective, when you're about as low as it gets, if that's how you see the world, if that's the message that you're trying to communicate, that's pretty awesome. And again, like I couldn't be more proud of how she's done that. And my prayer for Lucy is that ultimately God redeems all the loss that she's had over this last year and a half. As much as she's missed out on, as tough as it's been for her, my prayer for her is that he will redeem all that she's missed out on.
I think her last hospital stay, that was at the 6-week one.
Yeah, so it was about a month. It was about a month.
She couldn't have any contact with anybody, and I think y'all were able to go and see her. But
yeah, so because of her immune system being so sensitive and so weak, she was confined to just a wing at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. And so her mom and I could go, and we could stay, and we'd be there, and we sort of alternated, a night or two that we would go and be there. And she could have visitors for brief moments of time as long as they were healthy. But when she went in to the hospital, she knew she wasn't going out for the better part of somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 weeks. And so, again, her approach to that was awesome. It's not like she was looking forward to it, but she went in and she just knew that that's what she had to do to get well, and that was her focus the entire time. And so the strength and the resilience and the perspective that she demonstrated through that entire journey has been awesome. And she's not done yet, but we're much closer at this point than we've been the entire time.
What is going through your mind? You have this going on with Lucy. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, you have a baby in the mix. Are you this like, what is going on?
Yeah. So it's back to it's a theme. It appears in my life of you're not in control.
Did you ever struggle with your faith as you see your daughter?
Yeah, I never struggled with my faith. I firmly believe that those moments are why we do the things like Foster was talking. That's why we invest in our relationship with God. It is for those challenging, dry desert moments where you're looking around and there's really not any answers. There's not any clear vision or anything. It's what it is. And so I never wavered in my faith, but it was a test of somebody who likes to be intentional and thoughtful, and controlling may be a bit of a exaggeration, but I do like to be in control of things, and we were far from in control in that particular situation. What we could control was our attitude, our perspective, our approach, and trying to do everything that we could that Lucy could get the care that she needed so that she could get well.
So this is going on. Luke's heading off to college, and you have Finn, who's right in the elementary, going into middle school time, and London, who I guess is
now a sophomore at Hendersonville High School.
So she's like going into high school. How did they handle this?
Yeah, I think it was different for all of them. Obviously it was really tough on Luke because he's off at school and he and Lucy are very close. And so it was tough for him to see his sister going through all that she was going through and him not be close. That was tough on him. It was awesome to watch. London and Lucy have developed a really good relationship, being sisters. The Hendersonville cheerleaders did a night where they recognized Lucy during the football season, which was a pretty cool experience. Everybody wore purple, which was the color chosen for child cancer and Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so they kind of recognized her at one of the games, which was really great. And, Finn's 13. He's an 8th grade boy. And so I think
they're a whole different breed.
Yeah. But he's a deep thinker and a deep feeler, and there's not much that gets past Finn. And so I think he was much more engaged than I think the typical 13-year-old boy would have been. And whether or not he openly expressed a lot of that, you could see that he's seeing it and he's processing it, and he gets what's happening. And in London and Finn specifically, because they were around, and they'd be there when Lucy would come home from chemo and she's not feeling good, or she's asleep, or she feels sick, or they saw and experienced all those, and they would ask us questions and want to know and understand what's happening and what's next, and is Lucy going to be okay? And they would ask that on a pretty regular basis. And the entire journey was a great opportunity from a teaching perspective as a dad. In 2025, we don't get to visibly, tangibly see God today. But what I tried to share with our kids along the journey is the way this community has loved and cared for Lucy and for our family through this. There are people who I know Lucy had no idea who they were, who sometimes I didn't know who they were, would send cards, would send messages, would reach out and tell us that they were praying for us. They loved us. If there's anything that we needed, they could do, they would be there for us. And I told the kids, I said, life is very busy. It is very full. This is a very challenging time. And if we're not careful, we would miss it. But this is tangible evidence of God's love for us. And all of these people, friends, family, neighbors, whoever it is, coming around us and loving on Lucy and loving on us, that is God's love. And don't miss it, because it's a really special thing for us to be able to experience. And it could very easily happen if you're too busy and you just kind of are trying to move from one thing to the next and get on to the next thing. I wanted to be sure that we talked about that several times in our home, because it was so critical that we see this is how God loves us. It's from all of these wonderful people who are around us.
As you're doing this, you throw Henry in the mix. And now, you have Finn, who you say is in middle school, London's entering high school, and now you have a baby coming in.
We do.
How has there ever been any struggle with, you got Lucy, she gets all this attention because she's dealing with so much, and of course she needs attention, and now you have a new baby, and babies always get a lot of attention. Were y'all intentional in making sure, like Finn in London, or Luke's off at school, so he's kind of doing his own thing a little bit, but Finn and London are at home, making sure that, hey, y'all are still important to us?
Yeah, so that I actually looked at Cassidy in the middle of all of it, and I told her, I said, I want to recognize that I think we're doing a really good job of trying to love on these kids the best we can, despite the whirlwind of our life. So for context, in February of the same year that Lucy was diagnosed, we learned at 44 and 43 years old that we were going to have a baby, who is actually a medical miracle, because after Lucy was born, I guess at that point, 17 years prior to that, I had a vasectomy. So you can think about that, and the faces that I'm looking at are
I forgot
very
you told me that at a Davidson
entertaining.
Academy game, Davidson Academy game, and because that's when before Henry was born, and I remember you telling me that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've had a vasectomy.
Yes, so many men that I
get checked out.
So many men that I've talked to have the same look that you all just gave me, which is, And so as we were coming to grips with the reality of this new reality, the first visit we took was to Cassidy's doctor to confirm that in fact she was pregnant, and she is. And then the next visit was to the urologist to say, excuse me, what's happening here? And is there a possibility that we filed for child support somewhere? Because this shouldn't happen. And so we went through the process and confirmed that it was possible. And it's about a 0.001% chance that this can happen. And so little Henry entered our lives in September of 2024, and we just celebrated his birthday about 2 months ago. And so in the midst of all of it, We did. We made intentional time with London and with Finn and with Luke to try and make sure they understood that they also mattered. That even though that a baby gets a lot of attention and a sister who's pretty sick gets a lot of attention, that they matter too. And the other piece to it was we made intentional time for each other. We're trying to do that this weekend after Thanksgiving. We're going to try to go spend 2 days, and we've got a small little agenda that we're going to look at and just try to understand what's happened in our life over the last year and a half, and talk about a lot of things and talk about a lot of emotions that sometimes you don't even have a chance to process because you're moving so fast. But we sort of looked at that a couple of months ago, and we picked out this coming weekend because it was about the only weekend that we knew that was available to be able to do something like this. But that's been a real critical piece to it as well, is making sure that we make intentional time for each other, as well as these wonderful children that the Lord has blessed us with.
That's great. One thing I did want to ask you, what has it been like co-parenting Lucy throughout something as difficult as the cancer diagnosis, the intense treatments, long hospital stays? What has that been?
It's been very interesting. I think my cousin shared it best when he said early in the process, when we got to the point where we knew Lucy was going to have the stem cell transplant, and that meant about a month-long stay in the hospital. And so the plan was going to be, we were essentially going to alternate nights. He said, I bet you didn't have on your 2025 bingo card sharing a bed with your ex-wife. Because as you know, in a hospital room, you get the little cot on the side that folds out into from the couch to the bed situation. And so I would sleep on it one night and she'd sleep on it the next. And, he was like, I bet you didn't have that on your bingo card. Jeff, I can tell you that is one of the areas where obviously the Lord's been at work all in and around through this, but that has been an area where I can immediately see him at work, because their relationship wasn't great before Lucy's diagnosis. It had been challenged and strained, and it was unfortunate, but her diagnosis has absolutely brought them together. It's been unique, but almost every appointment that Lucy has, whether it's been a doctor's appointment or a chemo infusion or whatever it is, the three of us load up in the car. We head down to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, and we all march in there together, and we sit and listen to whatever the doctor has to say, or sit there through Lucy's infusion, or we've been a part of it. And so there have been some really challenging moments over the last decade, but I'm thankful that through Lucy's treatment journey that it's really been effective, and it's worked about as well as I guess you could expect it to. And I think it's been a really sweet thing from the Lord to see this bring the two of them together, when otherwise I don't think that's probably what would have happened.
I'm curious about at Cassidy, because you're going through this, so now you're having to spend a whole lot more time with your ex-wife.
Yep.
And of course, Cassidy, she marries you. She loves Lucy, wants everything the best, and wants her to have all the comfort in the world going through this. How has she handled? And you might not be able to answer that.
No,
but how has she handled that?
It's been one of those things that
her.
we've had to talk through and we've had to work through, because you're exactly right. There's definitely been days where I've had more time with my ex-wife than with my wife. There's been some of those chemo infusion days where you're talking about 6 or 7 hours at the hospital. By the time we get home and we get somebody to one event and somebody to the next event, and you get everybody home and you throw people in the baths and you do those things, like maybe Cassidy and I get 30 or 45 minutes together, and that's about it. And so it's absolutely been a thing. And, maybe somewhere along the way we'll write a book about all this and, talk about the things you don't expect to have to navigate through, or the things you don't. But that's absolutely something that I would warn or advise people as they're about to walk through it. Like it can be a challenge. I'm thankful that Cassidy is as grounded in her relationship with the Lord, and that we are as grounded in our relationship with each other, that you don't have to worry about those things. But it absolutely makes for some challenging, uncomfortable moments when there's days where I do spend more waking hours with my ex-wife than with my wife.
You know, you're going through all this. You're trying to lead your family, and you've touched on some of it. But how do you intentionally lead your family through Christ? Going this, you know, everybody else I've asked this to, they're not usually dealing with everything you're dealing with. But how do you make sure to make the leadership in your home Christ-centered?
So I think the first part is one, trying to lead myself. And if I'm honest, I think over the last year or so, that's not been the strongest part of my life, just from sheer exhaustion and honestly putting other people ahead of that, which is a challenge. But that's, if you go on my document that I've kind of created for our conversation this weekend, like that's something I've identified as I've got to do a better job of that moving forward, because I can see that in myself, that I have typically led myself really well and worked on my relationship with Christ, but that's not been something that I've given the best time to. And I'm seeing the results of that. And that's something that I know can't continue to go in that direction. But I think in terms of leading my family, it'd be real easy on Sunday mornings to just mail it in. But for the most part, even though we've got a baby and a chemo patient and everything else, we try to make sure that we're at church. Our kids enjoy going to church. They've got relationships there. And so we do whatever we can to make sure that they are there. We have those conversations, those intentional conversations about not missing God's love through all of these people all the way around, and trying to keep perspective. And then they've been very much, Finn's not on social media, London very much is, but to see them see how Lucy navigates this and talk about how that's not just something that you do, that's not for show, that comes from years of her pouring into her relationship with the Lord, and now the fruit that comes from that, and helping them understand that that's just not a switch that you flip when you start to go through hard times, that it's why it's critical that we spend the time doing that. And you know, one of the things that I've been so proud of Finn doing this year, Long Hollow's gone through the year where we've read through the New Testament as a church, and Finn's completed that program all on his own. And he goes in daily and he makes his comments and he does it. And through the Bible app, I can get the notification and I see when he's done it. And I've tried to continue to encourage him. Again, as a 13-year-old, 8th grade boy, he's going through and he's doing this reading on his own and he's making the time to do it. And I've been so proud of how he's done that. I want to make sure I don't miss on that as his dad, and call that out and encourage him and tell him how proud I am of doing something that seems maybe so routine or monotonous, but it's such a crucial discipline that I want to make sure that he knows, hey, Dad's really proud of you for doing that.
Yeah, I feel like with everything you do, it's like, where do you find the time? But then I think also, you know, if something's important to you, make the time for it. And I know last year, I'm looking at, you're coaching football at Davidson Academy, and I'm like, how is he doing this? He has a daughter going through cancer. His wife is pregnant, about to have a baby, and now he's coaching middle school football at Davidson Academy. And it takes a lot of time. I mean, that's practicing every day, games, and you know, and I think that is something where you stay intentional in your kids' lives. But like, were you this crazy at that time? Like, were you ever sleeping?
I tell people I'm a glutton for punishment, because I coached at Ellis this year as well, and it was a conversation that Cassidy and I talked about. You know, and I guess the thought process was, well, you know, to a certain extent, we had to get Finn there, and he had to be there and be a part of it. And so, you know, well, okay, well, we're already investing that part of time, so I'll do that. But you know, it's like I said earlier, it was truly a calling on my life. This could probably be another topic for another podcast for another day. But you know, I feel like there are a lot of people out there who are coaching and leading young student athletes that maybe shouldn't be doing that. And I feel like I've been called and led to do that. And I feel like I can connect with the kids, And I feel like the doors have opened up, and you're exactly right. I could probably find other things to do with my time, but it's important to me. And I feel like the Lord opened the doors, and so I did that. And for the most part, outside of a sweet and precious 14-month-old little boy, we sleep pretty good at night.
That's great. Yeah, just hearing everything that you're doing and how you're living your life. Is there anybody that now, or even as you're growing up, that you would say mentored you and led you to be where you are now? And also in that, is there, as a coach, you're obviously mentoring people, but is there anything specifically you can say, yeah, that's a guy that I've helped, steer the right way?
Yeah. So I always talk about my dad. I could talk about him for a long time. He ran a trucking company. He did a lot of travel. He made sure, back to the intentionality, he made sure he was there for us as his family. There were seldom any event that he wasn't at, even if it meant he came in on two wheels from, Savannah, Georgia. He made sure that he was present for all of our, he would leave after ball games on Friday nights because he had to get somewhere by Saturday morning. He would do that, but he was always there for us. And I talked earlier, like, there's just not many days that go by that I don't think, what would Dave Manning do in this situation? Somebody else who's significant, who was on staff here for a period of time, and now he's the pastor of a church over in Mount Juliet, is Mark Satterfield. Mark spent a lot of time with me. He and I went to Davidson together. He's 3 or 4 years older than I am, but he really invested in me and helped me see the importance of discipleship. He discipled me and showed what that looked like. He sort of modeled that and encouraged me in that way. And so, his time, his investment in my life, I think is really significant. I think for the most part, what I would hope that my children would say the same about me, that they can see how I have modeled a Christ-like walk, how I live what I preach, and that I have done the same thing for my kids that I felt like was modeled for me.
That's great. And, I ask guys that, and it's always like, oh, I don't think I mentor anybody. You're mentoring all kinds of young men, helping coach football and this. I'm sure you have guys at work, that look at you and the way you're living your life as you're going through all these hardships that just keep getting thrown in front of you. Do you have a favorite passage from the Bible?
Colossians 3:23 has long been, I knew pretty early on when I was in high school that I was a people pleaser. I knew that's just kind of how my wiring was, that I recognized early on that I was motivated for praise, that if I did something and somebody thought that was a good thing, that I looked forward to that pat on the back. And Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it as a way for the Lord, not for men. And that I've made that my life verse because it's about keeping perspective where it ought to be. Not for recognition or accolades or for anybody to come up and pat me on the back and say, great job, Brian. Really to do it for an audience of one, and it's the only one that matters. And if he's content, if he's proud of the way I'm living my life and the things that I'm doing, then the rest of it really doesn't matter. And so I picked up that verse. I think it was in a Reggie White book that I read when I was a junior or senior in high school. And I latched onto that because I identified with it a lot and have kind of made it my life verse.
That's great. Being in the leadership roles that you're in, what advice would you give to men on how they can display Christian leadership? You see all these different, as a sports fan, you look at different coaches. I think of John Wooden, Tony Dungy, and they look a lot different than a Bobby Knight. John Wooden and I think that's polar opposites, John Wooden and Bobby Knight. You're not going to see John Wooden throwing a chair across the court. Tony Dungy, same way in the football realm. His book is Quiet Strength. Mm-hmm. What would you say to men on how they can display, especially say they're a coach or this in business or whatever, how can they display Christian leadership? Yeah,
I'm a big believer in operating from your strengths. And so I really think the first step is to understand how God made you. Not trying to be somebody else, not trying to be like somebody that you might look up to or admire, but understanding how God wired you, because there's only one of you, and he made you the way you are for a reason, and his greatest desire for you, and I could go on a tangent for this as well, God's will for your life is to point people to him. That's it. It's up to you to figure out how you do that. It's up to you to figure out, how did he put you together? How are you wired? How can you go best do that? And so it may feel a little bit like a cop-out, but that would be my answer, is to understand your wiring and understand how God made you, and then go be the best version of that you can be. And that's going to bring a lot of honor and a lot of pleasure to God if you are living out who he created you to be.
I think that's good. I think that brings up a good point as Christian men and just Christian people in general. We're not all, matter of fact, none of us are wired to be Billy Graham, or none of us are whoever, but we all are a part of the body. And so I think Jeff's gifts are going to be different than mine, and Brian and Aaron, we're all called to obedience. And so whatever that looks like, Jeff, the way he handles people in the police force, he gets to display Christian leadership in a different way than what we would do in our jobs. But I still get moved by just something Jeff did. He invited a police officer to church. Now they're members here and loves the Lord and all that. It's just a neat opportunity wherever we're at. If we'll just be obedient to what God's calling us to do, then it changes the game for sure.
No doubt. We live in a world increasingly where there's a lot of comparison.
Yeah.
You can look around at your neighbor, you can look around at somebody else in church, you can look certainly online, and you can see a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and that can totally take you off of what you ought to be doing. And so that's just, I'm a big believer in understanding who you are, how you're wired, and go be the very best version of that you can be.
I think it's cool. I'll be done, but Colossians 3:23 you mentioned, and I've noticed that as I walk, the more time I've spent walking with the Lord, the less I even care about what other people think. You know, I mean, I love people. I'm a people pleaser too, but like that's not even the priority anymore at all. It's like I want to please the Lord and point people to the Lord, and because of that, people are satisfied with that most of the time. But it's like, who cares? I don't care what you think.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah, as we're getting ready to wrap up and stuff, I do want to encourage everybody listening. I want you to keep Lucy in your prayers, because her battle's not over. You know, and it's long and it's hard. But keep her in your prayers. Keep Brian. Keep her whole family. Pray for them as they go through this, and that she'll be healed. And she'll be able to go off to college. I think, doesn't she plan on going to Union? Is that right?
She'll barring any setbacks, she'll attend Union University in Jackson in January. And so we're gearing up to make that happen. And
is there a little bit of fear in that?
There's a little bit, just because of the journey. We've kind of learned at this point in her journey that we don't count anything as happening until it actually does.
Yeah.
Because there have been a couple of different setbacks along the way where you can kind of get rocked a little bit. And so we've just sort of taken it a day at a time and understand that's the direction we're headed right now, but also understand that on this journey, it can look a lot different. And I think the positive thing about Lucy's diagnosis is she has a very curable form of cancer. Hodgkin's lymphoma is a very curable form of cancer, and so she will be okay. And we know and trust that her journey's looked a lot more challenging and difficult than what we expected it to in the beginning, but that's okay, and we trust that it'll all work out the way it's supposed to ultimately.
Yeah, hopefully this opens doors for y'all to be able to share with others.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's like right now, how there's somebody that's going to be listening to this is going through something similar and can find some hope in what you're sharing. And, that there's a reason all this goes on.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you need prayer for?
You nailed it. A lot of the things that we talked about today, it's making sure I'm leading myself and pursuing Christ and doing that, and then the endurance to just keep doing it, to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and loving my wife and loving our children. And it's a good time of year to be able to do that. The holidays are a great time to be able to spend some time together and, catch up. And like I said, Luke should be home here any minute, and that'll be some good time together. And so I think that's it, is to pray that I will continue to chase after Jesus and that I'll continue to love on my family. And I think if those things happen, we'll be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, this will be coming out later, but this is being recorded the Monday before Thanksgiving. So I can imagine, Thanksgiving at your house there's a little bit to be thankful for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Aaron, welcome back. Aaron's been gone for these past couple episodes, but do you have anything you'd like to ask or add in or anything before we wrap up? Foster, you got anything?
No, I'm just grateful to hear this story. It's very, very encouraging.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you agreed to do this. I think it can just, really reach. This is a men's ministry podcast, but there's it's not just men that listen. A lot of people listen to this, and I think this can definitely have an impact on our listeners. So thank you so much for coming. As we close out, Foster's going to say a prayer for us. If you have, to our listeners, if you have any questions or anything, you can reach us through Foster's email. He'll give that out to you, and we will close out in prayer.
Yeah, email's fcarney, CARNEY, at FBCHTN.org. And we will go ahead and close in prayer. Lord, thank you for this time together with Brian and Jeff and Aaron. And God, it's such an encouragement week in and week out to have men from all different walks of life and backgrounds and scenarios come together. And so far, every end result has been the same. People are pointing back to your goodness. And what an encouragement, God. There's so much stuff and crap that we go through as men in our Western culture. And I'm just thankful that we can look at 30 or 40 or 100 examples of at one time of just different life scenarios and see your goodness in every bit of it. And I'm just so grateful for that. So Lord, we love you and pray for safety, as we travel home tonight, and help us to be more like you and be bold enough to share share you with others, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Path, a podcast production of the men's ministry of First Baptist Church in Hendersonville, Tennessee. For more information, or if you have questions, please visit our website at FBCHville.com. That's FBCHville.com.